Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's great to be here virtually. I'm not sure if I can share my screen. It looks like it's disabled. Can someone please co-host me? Or Ben, alternatively, you can feel
You
free to.
you're live now. I'm sorry about that. Yep.
No worries. No worries. Now I just have to pick the right one, right? All right. So thank you, Julie. My name is Rebecca Boyles, and I am, as she said, the Director of Customer Care and Marketing. I've been with VCE since late June of this year. So I'm still fairly new to the team, getting used to everything. It's been a great experience so far. And I had a few years at MCE before then, but we'll get into background in the next slide. So I just wanted to give a brief roadmap of what we'll be covering today. Excuse me. I love this photo with the red-tailed hawk on the power lines, taken by our photographer, who's also on our community advisory committee. She does most of our photography on our website. So quick introduction, give you an idea of who we are, how we got to be at VCE, a little bit of our story, some of the context around what's happening in community choice aggregation right now. So some of the basics on VCE, on the CCA landscape within California, some key considerations, what's happening in the regulatory landscape, which is obviously it's been a lot for those of you who've done the pre-reading, I'm sure you know. And then a little bit about our strategic plan, which is going to guide us in decarbonization, among other things. A little Q&A about us and about CCA in general. And then Mitch Sears, our interim general manager, is going to go into the case, the posing the question to all of you. Mitch, do you want to kick us off on the intros?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Rebecca. Again, Mitch Sears, I'm the interim general manager on loan from the city of Davis. And my bio is a little out of date. I'm getting close to 25 years now with the city of Davis. And I think I surprise myself when I say that because I never really had an inkling that I would be in a position for as long, or with an organization for as long as I've been. But to the city of Davis's credit, I started off at a very low level within the organization and sort of found my interest taking me in different directions, and the city of Davis was able to respond to those. So I want to just give a little bit of background on who I am, how I came to work for Valley Clean Energy and doing the work that I'm doing right now. And then I'll pass it over to Rebecca and Jim and Tessa to give a little bit of a little deeper introduction of themselves as well. But from an education standpoint, I started off. I have degrees in economics and environmental and urban planning, and so I'm really kind of trained mostly as a systems thinker, and I think that has been one of the things that has served me quite well as I've kind of made my way through my career. As I mentioned, I started off with the city of Davis, actually processing permits at the building counter many years ago, and from there I took on more responsibility and was offered more responsibility with the city, moving into the planning department and working on urban planning issues. And one of the reasons why I ended up in Davis is it was kind of a specific choice for me because during my educational background, some of the case studies were actually about Davis and the land use planning that took place here in this community. I would say to some degree, certainly, perhaps in large part, because of the influence of the university and the community being willing to kind of take some chances and to learn and fail and learn from that failure and come back with better and more creative solutions for land use planning. I always had an interest in natural resource issues, so when the opportunity presented itself, I transitioned with the city again to take on the role of open space manager. And basically what I was doing there was I was going out with a funding source that was generated locally. I'm actually proud to say that 70% of the community supported a measure to tax itself for 20 years to go out and buy agricultural and habitat open space around the community, recognizing that here in the Central Valley, one of the greatest threats to agricultural and habitat resources was urban expansion. So I was taking that local funding source and going out on the open market and negotiating permanent conservation easements for properties surrounding and sort of in the Davis area. Did that for a number of years, and then proposed to the city manager the idea or the history and legacy that the city of Davis had in sustainability, though we didn't have a sustainability manager at that point. So I proposed to him at the time, creating a position, and moved into that role and have continued to serve in that role for the past 10, 12 years or so. I was helped author the original climate action adaptation plan for the city of Davis, which is now just being updated, as well as identifying where the city and the community might be able to continue to progress on the sustainability side of things. That led to feasibility and investigation of energy programs, which was the basis for the creation of Valley Clean Energy. So I've really kind of been there from the very beginning, from feasibility study to hiring consultants like Jim at SMUD and others, building a team, getting ready for launch, launched VCE in 2018, and now have been helping the organization sort of navigate some pretty rough waters on the energy and financial side for the past 3 years, but we're coming up on 3 years of operation, and proud to say that the team is growing, strengthening, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but the board hit a real milestone in signing some major power contracts recently, as well as adopting our strategic plan that will carry us through the next 3 to 5 years. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca.
Sure, thanks, Mitch. Great to hear a little bit more about your background. As I mentioned, I'm still fairly new at VCE, so some of this will probably be new to my colleagues there as well. I'm definitely what you would think of as a non-traditional candidate. I've had a very non-linear career progression. In my 20s, I did everything. I kind of went to massage therapy school, got my certification pretty much right out of high school. I didn't come from a family that encouraged education, and in some cases actually discouraged it. So I was definitely the black sheep of the family in that way. So did that, really wanted to travel. I just had a passion to travel mainly Latin America, but around the rest of the world as well. So did that for a while, decided I wanted to get into international development work. So I went back and got my BA around age 30. So, I was on the 10-year plan, I suppose, and got in international relations. And after I got that, I went to traveled a bit around in West Africa, other parts of the world, kind of interviewing folks in the international development world in the field to see what I wanted to do, and kind of quickly discovered that wasn't really where I wanted to be. So came back home, got a job with a nonprofit, and also quite right either fit-wise. So decided I wanted to do law school or MBA, and had a good friend who had a friend who kind of gave me an evangelizing talk about Presidio. So those of you in the sustainability world probably know Presidio pretty well. It's a small private program, although it's expanded since I've left there. And its focus really is in sustainability. And so I went into it thinking maybe I would go into, more NGO work, nonprofit work, because Hunter Levins at the time was there, and she's kind of one of the, I guess the OGs of the sustainability movement, you could say. She and her ex-husband, Amory Levins, and she was really active in international development work, and she was a mentor for me. So that was one of the key draws to the program for me. Still didn't quite know what I wanted to do with myself. I mean, I'd been, at that point in my life, I'd been paid for a wide array of things from, massage therapy, as I mentioned. At one point, I was a house cleaner. I was a waitress at an Indian restaurant, got paid on a few wonderful occasions for fire performance and drumming. So like I said, nonlinear progression for my career. So when I went back to school, like I said, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Got out of Presidio, was super excited to change the world. I had two kind of paid internships at one of the world, actually the first sustainable paper company, and then also with an outfit called Future 500, who is based out of San Francisco and does stakeholder engagement in between activists and companies. So, we worked on issues as wide ranging as the oil sands, the tar sands up in Alberta, Canada, to women's body issues with Disney. That was a fun project. I think one of the biggest wins that we had when I was there was working with Disney on their paper policy, their paper procurement globally. And so there were a lot of, there was a lot of activist pressure that Disney was listening to, which was wonderful. And so we worked with them to craft a new procurement policy. And then after that, the main paper company that they worked with, it was a private company out of Indonesia, decided to turn the boat around for themselves because they were losing customers like Disney. And so we worked with them a little bit too on how to become much more sustainable in their management of forestry. So that was a great job. But after a few years, and I had my daughter, I took some time off, and then decided I wanted something more local. And at that point, I was an MCE customer and saw the opportunity there and jumped on it. And so I was an account manager at MCE, moved up a bit through the ranks there. I was there for about 4 years. And in that time, the organization doubled in size in terms of staff count, but also customer count. And so I kind of, went to more specializing in organizational change and like, what could I do to create policies and process documentation to kind of keep the organization from, spinning out. As with that much change and growth in a short amount of time, it's challenging for any organization. So I really enjoyed that. I really liked helping to, excuse me, craft policies that would help us, remain more efficient. And so mainly work with customers, but I missed marketing. So I was recruited to join the board of the Women's Environmental Network by a former coworker and doing mainly social media. So managing the social media for WEN, and that was really fun. And so of course, when I saw the opportunity at VCE, I thought this is perfect. We have the customer aspect and the marketing aspect because I really miss doing the marketing. And so thankfully they invited me to join their ranks, and it's a very different experience. It's a smaller team, which I actually prefer. You wear a lot more hats. You have to remain very nimble, and we're obviously operating on a pretty slim margin to have such a small staff, and we all really care about what we do. So it's been a really great experience, and yeah, thanks. Jim, are you ready to talk?
Yes, I am. Hi, I'm Jim Parks. I'm actually retired from SMUD and Valley Clean Energy, and I'm working for SMUD as a consultant, which is kind of an interesting space to be because consult is really comprised of two words. It's to con and to insult. And so you get paid to consult, which is a pretty good place to be, I think. I'll go back to the very beginning. I was born in Paradise, California. See, I only bring that up because it burned to the ground a few years ago. So any remnants of me are totally gone in the fire. But my trajectory was more like Rebecca's in that I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I was living in Belgium for a while, and I met this girl from Denmark. And we got engaged, and she said, you're going to have to ask my dad for permission to marry me. And he's going to ask you what you're going to do with your life. And I'm like, uh-oh, because I had no idea. And so I thought, well, electrical engineers are getting jobs right and left. I'm going to tell them I'm going to become an electrical engineer. And so sure enough, I go up there and I say, hey, I'd like to marry your daughter. He goes, what are you going to do with your life? And I said, I'm going to become an electrical engineer. And so, when you think about like your career choice, usually a lot more thought goes into it. Something you're really passionate about and you really want to do it. Well, I think the passion had to develop for me. And then I ended up on what I call, like Rebecca, the 10-year plan to get through school because there was no one supporting me. I had to pay my way, had to work. When I graduated, I had my son in my arm and my girl on my hand, my wife at my side, and I was in my low 30s and finally out of school. And I worked at Rayleigh's for 10 years as a janitor to get through school. Got the electrical engineering degree, got a job as an electrical engineer, transmission planner. And then I went, after working there for a year, I went over to SMUD and I worked in energy efficiency. I worked in program planning, so I was kind of responsible for developing all the energy efficiency, low income, some of the renewable programs, and that was a lot of fun. And then eventually I went into the R&D space, and from there we applied for a federal grant, and we got like $207 million to implement a smart grid project. And so that took several years, and we implemented this big project. And somewhere along the line, I was tapped on the shoulder and they said, hey, would you consider going over to Valley Clean Energy as the Director of Customer Care and Marketing, the position that Rebecca is now in? And I thought, well, it's not really my skill set, but I'll throw my hat in the ring and go apply. And Mitch has never really told me exactly why he hired me, but somehow we went through the interview and he said, you're the one I want to hire. And I thought, okay, why not? And I'll tell you, for the first month or two, I was kind of floundering around like, what on earth am I supposed to do here? I don't know this stuff. And one day it hit me. It's like, hey, no one here knows any more about this than I do. So just go with it, and just kind of work through the issues and deal with it. And over time, it became a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed working there. But I was working under contract from SMUD, and the contract was expiring, and I was going to need to go back to SMUD, proper, the SMUD campus. And I decided I didn't want to do that. I was old enough and had enough retirement years in, and so I just decided to retire. So I've been retired since the June timeframe, and have just been working a little bit with Valley Clean Energy to help out in a few areas. And it's still a lot of fun. It's a great team at Valley. I think they've got a good story to tell, and I hope you get a lot out of the session today. And back to you, Rebecca.
So Jim, can I mention something?
Yes.
I think you forgot to mention you're also a brilliant musician.
What were you at the ETCC meeting or something?
Right. Yes.
A couple of years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sometimes write songs and
you write songs and then, yeah.
And they had this emerging technology meeting. Oh, Kate, sorry, I didn't see you there. There you are. Okay. So they have this emerging technologies coordinating council, and I wrote this song to Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues, and I called it the Emerging Tech Blues. So that was fun.
It's gonna live with ET forever. It's the theme song.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Well, and I will say, Kate, that's why we hired Jim. He doesn't know, but that's why we hired him. Sorry, Rebecca.
No, not at all. And I know there was a question about career advice. Along those lines, I did sort of sing in my interview at MCE. I don't know if I told you that, VCE crew. It was a matter of just being comfortable enough, and it just sort of came out. And Tessa, I'll let you speak in just a moment. But I think, there was a question about career advice, and I thought about that for quite some time. I'm sure you all have had an amazing resumes and have come from different and varying places. I think for me, the most important thing in my career has been realizing that who I work with and the company culture that I'm in is in some cases even more important than the work I'm doing. Which obviously I'm very committed to climate change and renewable energy, that kind of thing. But it's so important to be in a company culture. And so, when you're going through interviews, many of you, I'm sure already know this, but this is for those of you that maybe don't yet, you're evaluating that company as much as they're evaluating you, and a good fit and, kind, compassionate folks to work with and non-toxic work environment are golden. So for what that's worth.
Rebecca, if I could add on too, if you're talking career advice, just 2 points. When I graduated as an engineer, jobs were not available. The market had dried up, and I went and got a student position somewhere, and that's what got me into energy efficiency. So if you're a student, I would recommend getting some experience, some real world experience as a student working somewhere part-time. And the second piece of career advice is when you get out of school, take a month off and travel all over the place, all over the world before you really get into the work world or get married and have kids and that sort of thing. Go out and enjoy yourself for a bit and then get on with life.
Well said, Jim. Tessa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jolie, for the introduction earlier. Mine's going to be a lot shorter, given I'm a bit younger than my colleagues. So I went to Humboldt State University, although I'm from Davis, and I studied environmental studies and appropriate technology. They had a CCA in Humboldt County, which is where Humboldt State is. And I realized in my studies, as I'm sure a lot of you still are, is there's so many issues in the world. So let me pick one. And the one that made most sense to me was carbon emissions are a huge issue. What is contributing most to that? And it was just as simple as that. And so I thought transportation, let's electrify that. And I had the vehicle to do that with the CCA serving Humboldt County, which is Redwood Coast Energy Authority. I graduated and I had a boomerang moment. And so I came back to my hometown and I said, there is a CCA serving the majority of Yolo County. And I called, this sounds kind of like the way your grandma says to go out and get a job, but thankfully it worked for me. And I called the offices and I said, I'm interested in helping you guys in whatever way I can. There were no job postings on the website at the time. And I was told, call it this time and we'll have a meeting. And I thought, I live really close by. I'm just going to ride my bike and walk in, and I'm just going to talk to everybody that's in there. And and fortunately, Jim, who was the person who was to hire me, just really wanted coffee, and I went with him and tried my best to say, I'm young. I don't have any experience, or not very much at least, but I'll just do whatever you guys want. I'll help. It was a very small team, 5 people. And I never left. So I continue to do work with electric vehicles. I now help with program planning and marketing with Rebecca. We all do a little bit of everything. So I feel very fortunate to be at essentially a startup without a lot of the risk involved. And as far as advice, I've gotten really lucky, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And if you can, find a niche, because there's a lot of smart people doing a lot of the same things. And there's a lot of smart people in this industry, but the CCA movement is something where you need 3 years to become essentially an expert, because it's something new. And so finding your niche in whatever it is that you're passionate with or mission aligned, I think that's very important. And then similar to what Rebecca said, it makes it a whole lot easier if you enjoy the people that you work with. The respect, the humor, the morale we have in our company, and the fact that we all love what we do makes it a lot easier every day, and something to look forward to. So that is my advice, everyone, and thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Tessa. I did see a question, I believe, for Mitch come in through the chat about how did you convince the city to create a sustainable manager role?
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail because we do have some slides to get through, and I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about Valley Clean Energy as well. But I think it was sort of a natural evolution for the city of Davis. It didn't take a whole lot of convincing. It really was a matter of kind of pulling together sort of disparate pieces that the city was already doing and saying, we can do this better if it's a coordinated and consolidated approach. So it wasn't too much of a pitch, but it did teach me a few things in terms of being able to organize information and putting together a strong case. So happy to talk to folks more about that offline if there's interest.
Well, we're really fortunate that you did that. And then of course, the city's getting dividends long into the future here, with Valley Clean Energy being one example. So thank you very much for sharing your personal stories and also for preparing the seminar for today about VCE. So if there's more questions, we can get to that probably towards the end, because I want to make sure we have time for the case and such too. Great.
All right, thanks. So I noticed that we are a little bit behind on the time, so I'll probably go through some of this pretty quickly. But I'm assuming that you're all fairly conversant in what a CCA is, but please do stop me if I'm going too fast. So as many of you likely know, AB 117, the Migden bill in 2002, did allow for cities and counties to form public community choice aggregation agencies. And this was coming out of the 90s and the aughts, where, there was the Enron scandals, and there was a big sense from the communities of wanting to have greater control over their energy supply. So, that piece, it's funny because sometimes from customers they conflate CCAs with Enron or other such market manipulations. And it's actually the opposite, that this, was largely in response to that issue. And we partner with investor-owned utilities, like in our case, PG&E, but there are, excuse me, CCAs in Southern California, Edison, and San Diego gas and electric territory as well. So we really do work with PG&E as a partner. Basically, we generate or procure the energy, put it on the grid. PG&E delivers it. They still do the billing, they do the line maintenance, that kind of thing. They also provide the bill. And so we actually work with a back office provider. We work with SMUD to do the bulk of our billing. And so they work back and forth with PG&E to transfer that data, get the data on the bill. It's a pretty interesting, involved thing, but we do very much consider PG&E to be a partner, and we work closely with them on many initiatives. So CCAs in California, CCA has seen exponential growth in the past 10 years. The first CCA started providing service in, excuse me, 2010 in Marin, and that was MCE. And as of late last year, there were 23 active CCAs in California. CCA continues to grow. There is a huge interest on the part of communities because it's been such a successful model. So, there are a lot of, as you can see here on the map, there's a lot of areas that are looking into CCA or joining an existing CCA. In some cases, that's easier for a community. And there have been some regulatory headwinds that we've had to confront, and it really is more difficult now to begin a CCA. So, you might see that happening more often, where communities are joining an existing CCA rather than forming their own. And Cal CCAs are a statewide association of CCAs. And so they advocate on our behalf. They do some lobbying. They also help to coordinate among the CCAs. So one of my favorite pieces of this job is getting to work very cooperatively with other agencies, excuse me, on everything from customer marketing initiatives to customer programs and ideas around that. It really is quite the community of folks working to further, renewable energy storage programs, et cetera. And so I co-chair one of the Cal CCA committee on billing operations customer care. And there are equivalent committees for the regulatory and legislative arenas. There's a marketing committee, environmental justice, which Tessa is very active in, excuse me. And so it's been a really good experience working in the CCA industry. And so, as you know, we are a CCA, Community Choice Aggregation, or sometimes Community Choice Energy program, you'll hear. We're not-for-profit joint powers authority, so we're a group of governments coming together to do something, in our case, to procure energy on behalf of the communities. We're controlled by a board of directors that is elected. I actually think I have that slide, so I won't go too deeply into that. But we like to think that we provide the competition that benefits customers, not only in cost. We cost the same as PG&E on the overall bill, even though there's extra fees added to the bill. So cost benefits in competition, but also, we can't totally take credit for it, but since CCAs have been in the market and increasing their share of renewable energy in their portfolios, the investor-owned utilities, the PG&E, SDG&E, SCE, have also, gone forward quite a bit on their renewable side. So we like to think that competition has spurred also, a drive toward more renewable energy in California. We provide choice. It's a choice where customers did not have a choice before. So any customer of VCE can always opt out to remain with PG&E should they decide to. We obviously are biased and think that there would be no reason to, because it's a better service for the same amount of money. Our member agencies include Davis, the County of Yolo, Woodland, and then most recently Winters. Winters just came on board this past January, so we're enrolling those customers. They're still receiving their compliance notices. We tend to do a mixture of compliance and non-compliant, well, outside of compliance, extra compliance, I guess. We do a lot of noticing of customers. So they have to receive 4 notices from us to inform them of the change and what that means for their energy choices. But we also do things like advertising. We do community workshops. We really try to get folks engaged in their bill, with, some success and some not. For many people, they never take a look at their electricity bill until they're paying too much. And then they might wonder, we have that challenge on our hands that folks may not even know that they're a customer because of the automatic enrollment aspect. We are governed by a board of elected officials, so highly involved. Some of these folks might look familiar to you from your community. We also have a community advisory committee, and has been immensely helpful to us. As a small staff, we often bring things to the CAC, everything from copy on an upcoming marketing campaign to our most recent environmental justice statement that we managed to, the board did approve recently. So things like that. It's really nice to have a community of folks that are really passionate about CCA in general and about VCE particularly, to bounce things off of. And here, this is a lot of information, so I won't go into everything, but in terms of size, we're kind of on the smaller end. There are a few smaller CCAs in the state, but we have about 65,000 customer accounts, which means, maybe one, I guess a little under double, well, what is it, 2.5 times that amount, Mitch, I think is the average in terms of, customers, actual real people on the other side of that. And as you can see from the demographics, we're unique in CCA in that we're the only Central Valley based CCA program, and we have a big agricultural load, and there's a fair amount of high poverty rate in Yolo County. So that does make some difference in terms of how we present to the community, the things that we try to provide to the community and community benefits, that kind of thing. And we have been advising other Central Valley programs if they may be excited about launching or joining a CCA. Some of the projects, some of the community investment that we're working on, we got a grant from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, SACOG, for installing EV chargers. And so that's happening in Davis, it's happening in Winters, in Yolo. And that's really exciting for us. We are very passionate about encouraging, the electrification of transportation. That's on our strategic plan, it's in our programs plan. We did sign some recent power purchase agreements with large scale, utility scale solar plus storage. Something that's really exciting about those projects is that they had some pieces in them that required some money going toward, workforce development programs in the community in which the program or the project was located. Sustainability programs, that kind of thing. So that's one of the things that CCAs do in their contract negotiations that I think is really beneficial for the communities. We look at what could be useful to that community and we put it into our contracts for power procurement. Quickly through this one, just to show that we're the same price. The added fees, I don't want to get too into the weeds there because it really does get very complicated and interesting very quickly, but basically PG&E is allowed to charge our customers, any CCA customers, money. It's for basically legacy costs from old contracts that they entered into without knowing that those customers would depart for VCE or other CCA service. So it's a pretty substantial piece of the bill, in some cases a third. And so that cost has been going up quite a bit. It's actually gone up about 800% since 2010. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of advocacy on the state level, trying to get more transparency into how that fee is calculated, but also to hopefully have it sunset at some point. This is our power content from 2019. It is the most recent power content that is actually, and this is the case for any load serving entity, PG&E included. So 23% unspecified, 75% carbon free, 45% renewable. PG&E in the same year was 29% renewable, so we're pretty proud of that fact. And the unspecified there is just, it's otherwise known as grid power, just power that can't be traced to one particular source. So it's got renewables in that mix. It's got, more conventional energy as well. And here is a map of our projects. So we put out a request for offers last year, which Tessa and our procurement team worked really hard on. And as you can see, we're pretty proud of what happened as a result of that RFO. The Redwood Coast Energy, we partnered with them to do a solar plus storage project. And we got a couple of really local projects around Winters and in Yolo as well. So And then all the battery energy storage systems are 4-hour duration.
Rebecca, just going back to that slide for just 1 second, also wanted to mention something kind of interesting that the procurement team did as well is number 5, there's aggregated demand response. So that's system-wide. Basically, it's a company that we're working with. We signed a long-term contract with them to go out and aggregate up demand. So this is mostly through commercial, industrial energy users, and to the contract is essentially to shape that load so that it hits the grid at the right time. We'll talk more about resource adequacy in the future, but that's a pretty innovative thing that we did on the aggregated demand response. But it does show the flexibility and kind of the creative approaches that CCAs can bring to the table when it comes to the energy sector. So sorry, just wanted to emphasize that one.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that back, Mitch. Demand response, I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. It's really important. It's an important piece of the energy puzzle. As you all know, the heat storms of last year caused some pretty big problems in the grid for California. So in addition to that PPA that we signed, we're also looking into what we can do on the agricultural side in terms of demand response, aggregated demand response, and then also electrification as well. Oops. All right. Thanks for bearing with me. So in terms of what we're putting back into the community, I mentioned the 2.9 million SACOG grant. That's I'll let Tessa and Jim speak to that a little bit more. That was before my time, but like I said, we're very proud of it and we're very excited and to be working with the different jurisdictions on that. And projects from the RFO, small hydro contract. So again, bringing those monies back to the communities in which we operate. And we have about $225,000 currently in our programs fund. Tessa is in the final throes of putting together our 3-year programs plan. So basically what we'll do with that is then we run that by our community advisory committee, we run it by the board, we make sure that everyone's been consulted adequately, and then reach out to the community to see what kind of programs we should be running, not just the programs that we think should be running as well. So that's the process there, and we're pretty excited about that. And then, as I mentioned, the $300,000 over 10 years in terms of the recent PPA that we signed for power. So some of the context around what's happening right now. Obviously, climate, huge issue, something that we care very much about. The setting in which CCAs operate, the utilities industry is changing a lot, has changed a lot since the introduction of CCAs in 2010. And there's just a lot going on. And like I mentioned, the CCAs all work together pretty closely on some problem solving on what we can do and really how can we best provide value to our communities. There are some headwinds around procurement and autonomy. The California Public Utilities Commission is really used to regulating the more investor-owned utility model. They've been around for over 100 years. In some cases, they just don't know how to respond to CCAs. And so when things happen, like the heat storm of last year, and there was a reliability issue on the grid, sometimes the CPUC may look to CCAs and say, what are you doing about this? And though we are subject to all the same requirements that any LSE, load serving entity, is subject to in terms of procuring 115% of our peak load for customers, there really is a sense of wanting greater control over that procurement. So it's difficult. It's an issue for CCA autonomy, and it's been being discussed in a few different forums right now. The above market costs, so that PCIA, power charge indifference adjustment cost, which I mentioned earlier about can be up to 1/3 of a customer's bill. It makes it really hard for us. We have to really work hard on our negotiation. We have to run very lean because we're very committed to keeping the same rates. It's an equity issue. We want our customers to not have to pay more for renewable energy. So how can we do that while also integrating that fee into our customers' bill? It's a challenge. Resource adequacy, so maintaining enough power on the grid, that's an issue. Part of it too is, and the procurement folks on the team could speak better to this, but in some ways, renewable energy has been so much more successful in the past few years in California because of CCAs, the growth of CCAs, that, it makes it hard. It's a supply and demand question, right? So the cost issue is always front and center for us. And then, yes, so the PCIA fee, the power charge and difference adjustment, has gone up 100% since the 2018 launch and 800% since 2010. And resource adequacy costs have also doubled since we've launched. So that's been a little difficult. So we formed our strategic plan. It was about a 9-month process, under much advisement from our board of directors, our community advisory committee. Staff spent a lot of time on it. We also worked with a consultant who really has been around since the inception of CCAs to really guide our decision-making going toward a carbon neutral by 2030 goal. And we're looking at, and so this is one of the things that will come up in the challenge, but how do we get to 100% carbon free hour by 2030? Is that realistic? Can we get there? How will we get there? So we're developing roadmaps for decarbonization and resilience and reliability, obviously huge issues, like I mentioned. And then how do we really expand local input in energy sector decision-making? How do we get customers who never read an energy bill to weigh in on their energy supply? And how can we really engage more deeply with historically and emerging disadvantaged communities? So how do we work with our customers to get them what they most need? We recently decided to participate, our board approved participation in the AMP program, the Arrearage Management Program, which is basically designed to help customers in the era of COVID who are pretty far behind on their bills. So we're working on things like that. We're working on how do we make more of our materials in language. So if customers, prefer to speak in Spanish, how can we get that collateral information education into their hands? There's a lot of things that we're doing along those lines. And of course, an investment grade credit rating. So 2 CCAs have managed to do that so far. It's not an easy task, but in the long run, it will help us to negotiate for better rates when we're procuring power. So that's a big goal for many CCAs. And thank you for listening to all that. It's quite a bit, I know.
Well, thank you for making that presentation and for all of you being here to be available for both the discussion. We have about 10 more minutes before we'll for kind of just general discussion and response to both your introductions of your personal backgrounds and then also, of course, the presentation you just made. So really appreciate you being here. So we'll give you snaps. And I'll be moderating any kind of questions that come through, and the advantage is that I get to ask any questions that I have because I can pretend like I saw the question come in on the chat. So my first one would be, Valley Clean Energy is as you pointed out, is one of the few, or I think the only one currently that's serving Central Valley, right? And so having that unique kind of set of customers, and I imagine it's the agricultural piece that's probably more pronounced than other territories. You have an opportunity to not only create differentiated programs from the other CCAs, but as you talked about as well, there may be other CCAs, other communities that want to expand. And so I wonder 2 things. One is, what types of programs are you seeing on the horizon that address that agricultural base, that fit with agricultural customers? And the second is, as you interact with other communities, Winter's just joined, is there pressure for other communities, especially Central Valley and agricultural communities, because they will be proximate? Are they approaching you about joining Valley Clean Energy? I don't know who wants to answer that.
I think I'm gonna let Mitch handle that one. He's been involved more in those conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Good questions. I think just in answer to your second question first, there is interest. Rebecca, if you want to go find I think it's a couple slides up where it shows the CCAs in California. So what you can see, so we're the sort of the gold star there in the middle. But you can see it's right now it's primarily a coastal kind of arrangement. Some of the other programs are beginning to reach out into the Central Valley and capturing a few cities. But we say we're the only Central Valley based program because we think that that does differentiate a little bit. There has been interest. We have discussed, for example, with Butte County and Fresno and Stockton and a couple of other Central Valley communities about what the CCA model is, what it looks like, what the Central Valley kind of perspective is. So we've been able to share that over time. There has been some discussion, some interest in terms of expansion of Valley Clean Energy, and we continue to pursue that. One of the things that's kind of important to mention here, though, is that CCAs really are community-based. And so there is a question, there's that creative tension between, being able to serve and really understand what the local needs are, as opposed to expansion and getting some of the cost benefit and scale benefits of being larger. So there's that kind of balance point. And so we're kind of actively engaged in that discussion right now. The board talked a little bit about that during our strategic plan discussion, but right now we're really kind of focused in on Yolo County and our current service territory. And then remind me your first question again. What
unique programs that you might be kind of gearing towards agricultural customers?
So right now, for example, we're investigating whether we can do a pilot program on demand response with agricultural pumping loads. Because again, when we look back to the summer of 2020 and the heat storm that happened and the shortages, the ability to have some flexibility in when energy use happens is critically important. And the agricultural pumping load does present that opportunity. That, along with HVAC use here in the Central Valley, really do track pretty closely to the summer peaks that we see here in California. So if we're able to tackle that first on a pilot basis to show and demonstrate proof of concept, that could really become an important tool for the state of California as we figure out how we integrate more intermittent renewables like solar and wind into the mix, because the demand side is equally important. And if we're smarter about how and when energy is used, that can be really critically important. And what I would say is that CCAs are really, and we'll talk more about this, but CCAs are really uniquely positioned because we are community-based. We're not for profit. We don't have a profit motive that drives our decision-making. We have community value that drives our decision-making. So we think that's an important aspect of CCAs.
Great. And there was another question that came in, which you could probably read here, but it's asking about what made Yolo County prime to be this first Central CCA, Central Valley CCA based CCA.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one too, because I've been around, from sort of the onset here. I think it was a function of a number of different things. I mean, as some will recall, energy has been a really important piece in Davis and Yolo County more broadly. In fact, some don't know this, but Title 24, which is the gold standard of energy codes in the entire country, started around a kitchen table in Davis. And then it expanded to the state of California, and then again became a gold standard for the entire nation. So there's been that kind of long-term interest. A lot of that is driven by the campus and the work that's been done here. But I think that it is a combination of the demographics, the environmental values, and the advocacy that's happened here over time. And one other quick note I would make is that that was sort of demonstrated back in 2003 and 4 when there was the SMUD annexation vote that ultimately didn't succeed, but it demonstrated that Yolo County was serious about figuring out how local energy can be done better. So I think that was really kind of a driving force and a foundation for the formation of Valley Clean Energy going forward.
Thank you, Mitch. There's a couple questions that I've gotten, and I don't think they went to everyone, so I'll read off a couple of them here. One is, are VCE customers still subject to public safety power shutdowns, PSPS events?
Yeah, great question. In short, yes, they are. Unfortunately, because PG&E still handles the transmission distribution side of things, and that's where the power shutoffs occur. VCE customers do their power goes out along with PG&E customers. We do our best to try to augment PG&E's messaging on that so that folks are prepared and know and can prepare in advance. But yes, unfortunately, they are.
Another question around how CCAs interact with community solar programs and whether those are ones that you're investing in or if they're antithetical to.
Hey, Ben, before we take that question, if I could just expand just a little bit on what Rebecca said, it's absolutely the right answer. What I would add is that part of what Valley Clean Energy is doing, again, through its strategic plan and its thinking about programs, is figuring out, again, we're local, we're on the ground. Our board is made up of local elected officials, so we're really responsive. So we're looking for opportunities where PSPS events might be able to be, we might be able to address that through some of the investments that we make. It wouldn't be directly in the grid, but understanding how the local distribution system works and where we might be able to make investments for things like battery storage or like additional energy production or microgrids. That's something we're doing right now. We're actively pursuing that. So that can be a way for us to address some of the PSPS impacts. In addition to that, looking at critical facilities, understanding kind of the lay of the land here in Yolo County better than the investor-owned utility might be able to, and having that connection to local decision-making at the cities and the county really allows us to engage more deeply in that question. So sorry to backtrack on that a little bit, but I think that's another important aspect of CCAs.
Yeah, thank you for giving that additional clarification. Tessa.
I was hoping to backtrack a little if I could on the ag program. So agricultural customers are a big part of who we are and who we serve. So, but there are other CCAs that we communicate with that are doing some ag programs, one being from 3CE, the CCA that serves more of the Central Coast. And I mentioned this so it frames the question we go into later of fuel switching agricultural equipment and making it so you provide a simple application because these are busy folks, and you provide a rebate based on how much emissions would be reduced by them fuel switching. So there's an equation they have where they say, okay, here's a tractor, and we'll provide them up to $20,000 to switch it to an electric tractor. How many emissions would that reduce over time? And that kind of gives an idea of who they're going to provide those incentives to. And then the other one, I'm actually having a call with Jonathan Keebles, if you are familiar with him at UC Davis, about microgrids for agricultural customers. So that taps into the resiliency factor of PSPS events and so forth. So just wanted to add that tidbit.
Thanks, Tessa. I think the last question I had mentioned, which we kept backtracking from, which was around CCA kind of interaction with community solar programs. I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Again, just real briefly, the CCA platform does allow for creation of community solar projects. I believe MCE over Marin has done a little bit of work in that space, kind of selling kind of subscriptions in a way to a specific solar facility. It's not something that VCE has engaged in yet. It is something that we have an interest in potentially pursuing in the future. Right now, we're really kind of focused on nailing down kind of the foundational energy contracts that we need to be able to remain competitive, and then being able to expand out and look to how we might be able to integrate some of these other types of programs. So it's something that's on the radar, but not something we're engaged in directly yet.